Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. Jessica Henry here. I have a fun project I'm going to work on with you today. I am going to do another watercolor painting. I thought it'd be kind of fun to approach that Victorian watercolor theme again. So I have an owl, the barn owl that we're going to work on today. So I'm going to show you how to work out some more of the darker values. Like I'm going to do a darker value in the background, and then this whole side of the owl is really bright light. So I'm going to paint that, and you'll get to see some of that with the watercolor. Alright, and so I did talk about last week about a giveaway, and the way that this is going to work is you comment in this video, and on Monday, the following Monday, that is December 10th, I will be drawing a name from those who've commented, and as long as you're a subscriber, you could win. Okay, so that is what we are going to do today. So I have already talked about doing watercolor washes and things like that, so I will just show you the basics of what I have set up here today. And if you're interested in more of those foundational Victorian watercolor videos, I'll put those below, and you can see some of those. And we are all set to get started. Alright, so I am all set up here with my 150-pound cold press watercolor paper, and it's in a block like this by Arches, and it's glued on almost four sides with a little bit of an opening here where I can take a knife and just slit through and pop it off when I'm done. I usually wait till it's all dry to pop it off because the wetness from the paper can rip it as you're tearing it off. So just let it completely dry. Alright, so now I have my regular palette set out here, and today I am going to use mostly neutral tones, some ochres and some darker, ultramarine blues, siennas and so forth, a little bit of green. But my palette today is going to be very simple. And then I've got a paper towel here, but I also have a natural sponge here too. And so what I'm going to do first is to start, I've drawn this on, and for the purpose of this video, I used a little bit darker HB pencil. Typically you'd want to use an H pencil because I did it a little darker so that you guys could see it a little better, but typically you want it to be a little lighter so that as you're painting along, the graphite doesn't get loose and kind of affect the colors. But I'm going to work with it here today, and I think it'll be fine, especially since most of this background is going to be pretty dark and really striking. Okay, so I just take a mop brush, and I'm just going to start out by wetting the whole thing. Now while this is sitting here being wet, I'm going to quickly mix up a light blue mixture. And you can kind of hold your paper a little bit at a side to see, or I'm kind of leaned over down here just to see if it's all wet. Okay, so just nice and wet, saturated. Now, nice big puddle over here of blue. And I'm doing this because I'm going to use this just as my first layer in the background. And I will put it on the shadow of the bird, but I'm going to be very careful to not paint this where I want a bright, bright light to look. It might flow a little bit into the white of the bird, but that's okay. Just a little there. And I do want it in the shadow parts, so I'm just going to go right over that. Just drag your puddle down. Just like that. So now all of a sudden my bird looks as though it's partly cast in shade. Get down to the bottom, wipe your brush off a little, and if you have extra water, just wipe it up. You don't want to come back up through here and play around with it. Just let the puddle slope down. I have it sitting on a little dish underneath here just to help prop it up a little bit, because water has to travel somewhere. If you just lay it flat, the water's just going to kind of pool there. And for some effects, that's fine. You may want that, but for this purpose, I really do want to keep it downhill in my Victorian washes. So I'm taking just a clean sable brush. I'm just going to make sure that this whole passage along this here is not really getting much of the blue. I don't care if it comes down here because the focus of this painting is up here. So that was wet and mostly wiped off and just kind of rubbed out a little like that. Okay, so we're going to take a minute and let that dry. While that is drying, I'm going to come over here and plan my next attack. So that is going to be on the bird. The background I'll kind of fiddle with a little bit as I'm going along here, but not too much. So I'm gonna mix ultramarine blue, and let's get a nice big puddle because I'm gonna be using this puddle and variations of this puddle throughout the whole painting. This is gonna be a nice warm gray. So there we go. We have a nice blue gray, sienna, ultramarine blue. You want to test your colors to see where they are when you're working on something that's a little bit more involved. And this is pretty close to the paper that I'm using. So that is, remember, it's never the color of the puddle, but it's the color that's under the puddle. So I'm going to drag it down just to test that. And you can see the puddle's much darker, but that's a little lighter. So I'm looking at my owl reference, and I think I'll make it a little bit lighter. And now I'm just going to put this only in the places where I see a little bit darker area. And that's up there on the forehead, and then it comes around here. And then I'm careful to only put the darker where I see it, so there's a little lighter here, and I'll show you how to lift out some color if you feel that it's a little bit too dark. I'm going to grab a little bit of yellow ochre. Oh, I forgot to wake up all my colors. Wipe that off a little. And just using the tip of the brush, all you're really doing is moving puddles around. Just like that. Clean that off. Grab a little bit more of that mixture and pull this puddle down. I'm going to pull it all the way down. Here. Okay, so now I'm going to take a moment and wake up all my colors. So with my mop brush, I'm just going to go through and put a dab of water on each one. And I don't know which ones I'm going to use, and so I'll just give everything a little bit of a drink. There we go. Let's grab a little bit more blue in there. I want to get some of these passages where it's a little bit brighter blue. Clean, pretty blue along this owl's face. Under here. All I'm doing is starting with the I started with the lightest by keeping that white. Now I'm moving my way slowly, carefully, gradually around the bird, looking for anywhere that's a little bit darker, just a teeny bit different shade in the cool blue family. Okay, but now I think that that pretty much resolves the blue, the white of the bird that's in shadow. So now I'm going to get some of the yellow of the bird that's in shadow. So let's get some cad yellow and some yellow ochre. And I want this really, really light. So I'm going to check it here. It's still too dark. Let's go even lighter. That looks better. Let's add more water to this. Alright, and I see some of that on the head. So we're just going to just gently put a little bit up there. And then I see some where the sun is hitting his back here. And you can see it's just, you're just barely, because this is still a little bit wet, if I put a little bit of very light mixture on it, it's very hard to see where the puddle delineates with the white of the background. I'll put this all the way up here. And it's okay to leave some white streaks, because it looks like the highlights. I've got that pretty much white down here. Alright, now I'm going to paint some of this darker shadow in here with this yellow. Just like that, it's starting to take shape. And there are some parts of this painting where you'll just let it dry and go on to something else. Right now I'm going to put a little bit darker value. While it's still wet, it's okay. It's barely wet. So let's make a little bit more of that shadow mixture on this side of the wing. And I'm going to start up here because I see it darker. Right here where this sort of curves and goes under. And I had drawn that with the pencil. Wipe your brush off if you need a little bit more control. And then I'm going to, without getting more color, just going to wipe my brush off and let this gently, the wash, I'll keep gradating it as I go down, down, down. Because it's really just darker right at the edge of the wing where it turns and hits the sun. Now I'm going to mix up a little bit of sienna with the ochre. Let's see what we have going on here. It should be a little bit darker. Okay, that's good. Too much on my brush. I want a little bit more control. So I'm going to take this now over to where I see some more of this ochre color in the bird. And I see some of it in the lighter areas too, so I'm going to wipe it off and let some of this just gently fade this way. Okay, and then up in through here. Wiping off some of this so that I can really erase a little passage there. Let's grab a little bit more of that yellow ochre, or excuse me, the cad yellow. Just drag that wash up in there. And I do want some more of that over here in the light, where the light is really hitting these flight feathers up here. Okay, we're getting to a place now where I kind of want to, I'm thinking about switching to a smaller brush. I want this a little bit softer here. And I do want a little bit more of these gray areas. Oops, too dark up in here. Get a little bit more gray over here. And you can see by adjusting the amount of liquid that's in your brush, you can control what's happening with your puddles as you're applying them by just a little bit different pressure. If I push really hard, a lot more of that water is going to come out of the brush. Okay, cleaning that off. I have a little area here where I really do want to kind of erase because I see a little lighter passage than what I have. So I'm taking this stubby little brush and I got it wet and I wiped it off, just like that. And just by doing a little bit of that, you don't want to overwork it because you can really damage the surface of your paper, but just a little bit of a rub like that, and you don't need any maskoid. little bit wet. And then I saw a little bit up in here where I really want it. Okay. And then I'll save some of that down there for the details and smaller brushes. Okay. I'm gonna just get a little smaller brush here and paint some gray on the feet. A little bit more water in there. Remember when I was talking about last time the bristles of a Kolinsky sable, and then somebody had asked about the hairs and so forth. The hairs of you've seen your own hair under a microscope and how it has those scaly, it looks kind of scaly under a microscope. Kolinsky sables the same way, any natural hair is, but synthetic, like these, they're just plastic, slick plastics hairs. They obviously don't have that scaly feature. And so what happens is when you use a synthetic brush, it can't grip as much of the water because it doesn't have those scales that natural hair does. And so that's why artists have favored natural bristle brushes. Okay, so while that is just kind of relaxing there, I'm going to mix up a little bit more darker gray for the branch that he's standing on. Let's add some burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and I think I'm going to start down this way, just head out this way. It's not important to me that it has a lot of detail and information. I don't really need to make it go all the way off the paper. And that's another thing I love about these sable brushes too, though, is that you can get it into a nice sharp point like this and really get in there and around things. And I don't mind either that the branch is kind of blending with the foot there because it's pretty much the same color and value, and it'll help me to lose an edge, which I think is always interesting. Going back. I think I'll add some greenery and so forth in there. Okay. All right. Let's just do that while I'm thinking about it. So I'll take a little bit of ultramarine blue and some of the yellow. And I just want this pine green because when this is all done, I'm gonna add some snow. So I thought this barn owl sitting in a pine tree would be really neat. So this is gonna be more or less just some random sort of choo-choo-choots. And then I'll come back around all this with a little bit darker. Alright. So I'll let that kind of just dry for now. You can kind of check it to see how we're doing. Okay. Now I'm going to start at the top and just work my way down with more detail. This is a filbert, little tiny size 4. And I'm grabbing some ochre, little sienna, okay. Starting up here. just going to dab some of this up and around where I see it's significant up here. There's really not a lot to do when you have an area that's very drenched in sunlight and white, because it's just the white of the paper. And you'll see how I will get the eyes in place here soon. I'll do that with a nice dark black. I'm not going to use flat black or ink, but I will get a really rich dark. I'm just taking some more of this all the way around. I don't want to go a solid line because it really doesn't reflect that way. Let's get a little bit of this alizarin in here because I'm seeing the beak has some little bit rosier tones to it. Wipe the brush off. It's usually just enough to sort of clean off whatever it was you're working with. That's all you need for that. Get a little bit more of the... Actually, even clean my brush off and get some more blue and just really kind of focus around the face and the eyes. Right up here. You can see there's hardly any color on my brush. A little bit of ochre right up here around the eyes. Even just by that quick wipe, there's still pigment on my brush, but not much. Wipe, and now I'm going to soften that. So we'll go on the other side. Pull that shadow down a little bit more towards the beak. I'm going to just take a little bit more of the blue and pull it up this way. Little tiny spots. Clean that off. I want to lighten this a little because I think that this passage here is a little too dark. So you can clean your brush off and just rub areas where you want it a little brighter. Let's get a little more blue in here. Too dark. A little bit more blue, this area. And I'm allowing my brush stroke, even though it's watercolor, to still define some of the shape because it's a little bit like drawing. And you let the brush strokes just sort of help define where you want the illusion to take place there. A little cleaner in here. And get this a little more definition in here. I'm going to lift off a little bit right in here. You See, just by rubbing it backwards, wipe it off. Rub it backwards. That makes a big difference there. Okay, now I'm going to just take some of that blue and go directly under it. This way. And just like that. Now I'm going to do the eye, and I will just get a really dark mixture of ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna. And you don't want to use very much water in this because it won't have the appearance of being black. You know, the more water you add, the lighter it gets. So let's see where we're at. Okay, that's fine. I think I'm going to use an even smaller brush for this. Dry it off. Now I'm being careful to paint around where I want the shine to be, but I may even still come back and just do it the tiniest dot of acrylic white on it. Taking a little bit of the yellow ochre, and I want to do some of the eyelid up here above the eye. Okay, now the other eye. Now the outside of this eye is clean and sharp, but the part where it is touching the bird on the inside is fuzzy because of the feathers. So I dried my brush off and I'm just scraping it in with little tiny lines to suggest feather fluff. Alright, now I'm going to take a little bit darker red mixture with the same tiny brush and just kind of clean up around the nose, the beak, I guess. Little tiny bits of detail here while I have this little brush. So I think that's okay now for the bird. I'm gonna come around to this side a little bit more and just pull in some of these features over here. Okay, so now I am noticing that I really want to get some of the information around this area, because this really is the focus, the area of focus for the painting. And so I'm going to work on getting some of these more beautiful ochre passages and maybe even use a little bit of red in there to pull out that rich orange color. I'm just looking at now where I see that, and with keeping my puddles clean and simple, I'm just focusing on one area at a time. And I wipe it off if it gets maybe a little too dark or I want to lighten it and whatever. So you can just control it that way. Wipe it off. And my paper towel is pretty wet, so even by wiping, I'm still allowing a little bit more water up into the bristles, which helps to soften it a little. Okay. I guess they're cleaning the streets today. So while that brown there was still a little bit wet, I added a little bit of dark here and it kind of blurred up in there, and it was, I like that effect, it's kind of pretty. So this really is just focusing right now on the darks. Because the lights are pretty much done. I'm softening this edge where I put this puddle down. A little bit more over here too. So now I'm going to kind of just soften this transition here where the dark patch of these feathers meets the light patch of the sunlight on his back. Just sculpting out some of these wing anatomy darker areas in here. A little bit darker area. Gray, pulling that down like that. Yellow ochre, cad yellow. Mix those together. We want some more of that cad yellow in there. Wipe, wipe, wipe. If it gets too dark, you have a very little amount of time, but you can lighten it. Just add a little water, rub it real quick. Okay, now as I move down to this darker feather, I'm going to add a little more ochre and that in there. A little more yellow ochre, or it's the cad yellow up in here. Oops. That just kind of blend into the gray. I want a little more cyan in there because it's kind of greenish. There we go. I'm going to take some more of this darker gray and just kind of sculpt out while it's still a little bit wet under this wing. You see how the color just kind of blurred? If you don't use too much water, it'll kind of have that softening effect. But if you grab too much water, it'll kind of clean the area, and you don't want it to do that. Under here and just pull out a little bit more detail around these feathers. I'm going to take this little stubby brush just to soften this area here a little bit more. Gentle, clean swipes down here. beautiful flight feathers, these barn owls. And I'm just taking a little bit, just a combination of different grays and ochres to get some of these. I may just leave some of those lighter strips in there to reflect the edges of the feathers. Maybe even just a little bit of that feather detail down here too. Remember, more detail doesn't make it more lifelike. It's just, you have to be very selective about where you place the extra detail. And remember that everything you do has to be part of telling the story. So in this case, I really want the drama of this beautiful area here. So what I'm trying to do is I'm working on creating all of this to read but not be distracting. So you have to pick and choose what elements of detail and information are going to be important to convey this beautiful soft bird, and yet keeping the focus where I want it. And I really don't want too much dry brushing on this bird, simply because it's so soft, and if you do dry brushing, it has a dry, scratchy look to it, and it might be fine for some things, but in this case, I think it would make more sense to have everything really soft. Okay, now I am going to, I feel that the body of the bird is pretty well in place. I'm going to come back through with my tiny brush, and is this the tiny one? Oh, I think I was using this. I'll just use this one with a little bit more detail now. Get my dark puddle wet. And these are really tiny, tiny synthetic bristles. So I have to come back a lot to get paint. Be careful when making spots that they don't become too spotty. You can kind of get them too dark for the surrounding. So I just take my finger and just kind of dab them if they get too dark. I chose not to pen and ink this one because I really liked, again, that soft effect that this bird had. And if I pen and inked it, it would take on a little bit more harshness and clarity and all that, which I kind of didn't want. I just want it really muted. On Facebook and Instagram, I showed a blue jade that I had done, and I didn't pen and ink that one either. That one is just the same effect. I just used a teeny brush. feathers, a little bit more striking patterns down here. So we'll just kind of put some of those in, not many, but we'll put some in. So I'm thinking that some of these look a little bit too bright here, so I just want to tone these down just a touch. Now you can see it really doesn't matter that a lot of it got dark or kind of lost to the branch, because I'll just pull out a little bit of the leg and foot.
So far, this is, even though it's a tiny brush, it's really just a matter of moving little tiny brushes around and just navigate it that way. Just taking that color.
Now this it might be okay to do a little bit of dry brushing because it's a tree branch. Just a little. All right, now I am going to work on the darker background. So just pulling in a little bit more of this brighter sunlight on this green, just to layer some of these colors over other colors, just to get some of that effect. All right, now I'm going to mix up a really big puddle of really dark colors. So just wipe that up a little bit. A lot of ultramarine blue. I actually have some indigo here. I think I'm going to grab two. More of that. You don't need very much water. And then get some burnt sienna in there. Some more sienna. That's going to give me a nice dark color. So let's see. Okay, see, it's not flat black, but it has a nice darkness to it. Alright, so let's focus on the head, around the head. Just turning the paper as I need it. I'm going to come back through here and soften this edge where the background meets the feathers. I'm going to work on this in a passage at a time. And that's a little bit wet where I put that yellow in there, so I kind of like that effect. Give it a boundary up there. And remember, with watercolors you can hide your boundaries and edges with matting and so forth, how you frame it. And coming up around the back. I think I want that a little bit darker, but not really dark right here. While it's still wet, I can just take my little stubby blender, wipe that off, and then it gives the bird that illusion of being soft. Like that. And that's how you soften an edge in watercolor. So we're not really dragging that puddle down, are we? There we go. Good, now down around this side of the head. And if you keep this wet, you don't end up with that broken edge look that you get when a puddle starts to dry. So just try to keep it wet and moving. Just kind of It is difficult to get a good wash when you have a really dark color. And you can work on building this up too. I may even, once this is dry, it'll dry a little bit lighter. I may even come back through here and just put another coat on it to darken it even more. And I purposely added a little bit of water down here so that this can start to just fade. I don't mind that that's a little bit lighter. Alright, now I'm going to get a little bit more of that puddle mixed up. Come back under the tail down here. If I do that to that side, I have to do it to this side, so I'll pull that up a little. Alright, now this passage. Let's clean that up a little. Okay, so I'm going to let that layer dry, and I do want to mix up a little bit more of the darker color just to really frame in around the face with a darker frame there. So you don't want to add another layer until the first layer is dry when you're layering darks, because it can lift off the paper. Down here, I don't mind that it's a little wet, so I'm going to start in this area and just kind of pull out a little bit more of this. And I'll be coming back through here softening these edges too. Letting that suggest tree branches and just forest stuff and things back there. Just let this. I don't mind that that kind of fades away that way. Alright, so now I'm going to just let this kind of fade off in the background this way. don't want this to be distracting, so I'm going to put a thin layer over all of that. Just let that live. All right, now I am going to come back through here and just soften some of these areas. Soften the stick. This doesn't need to be that important. And soften some of these tree branches. Really want it just to look like softer branches back there, not scratchy little things. Just lifting out some things, just to help sort of tell a story without being overwhelming. All right, now with this brush being cleaned and wiped out, I'm going to come back through here and really just clean up the edges. Soften that down here. All right. Now, I'm going to put a little dab of acrylic paint on my palette. Just the smallest little dab. And I'm going to take some paint on, this is a kind of a, this brush kind of ruined a little bit. And then testing it on a separate sheet of paper. I need a little bit more paint and water. There we go. Maybe a little more. All right, let's add some snow. I really like the effect of the snow on this, especially with this beautiful, beautiful owl. And if you use a little bit more pigment or paint, it'll have a little bit bigger snowflake effect. So I'm going to put a little bit of snow on things too. All right, now one last little tiny thing. It's not much. I'm going to do that one little tiny sparkle in its eye. That's it. All right, now I want to thank you guys so much today for joining me while I painted this owl. And remember, if you comment below, I will do a name drawing if you have subscribed also to my channel on Monday the 10th. All right, you guys, I will go live on YouTube and I will see you then, and have a good weekend. All right, bye-bye.